Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Ishi and today I'm here to talk about some books that I read recently. Apologies for standing in front of a literal barn, but I was unable to film at home because my entire family is at home at the moment because of social distancing and all that, so I am out here. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm really sorry about any outdoor noises that you might hear, like birds and cars and airplanes. Hopefully this works. I decided not to do a March wrap-up because I was planning on rereading Percy Jackson in March, and I'm like halfway through right now. I have a vlog coming up for it already, so I don't want to talk about the series in like a wrap-up and have it be redundant, so I am just going to talk about the books I read in March that are not Percy Jackson. Let's get right into it. The first book I want to talk about is Crown of Feathers by Nikki Palpretto, which I was very excited to read because it was so pretty. I was seduced by this cover, which is why I went and purchased this book with my own money. And I regret it just a little bit because this book did not end up being one of my favorites. I gave it 2.5 stars, which is not a bad rating. I consider it more of like a middle rating because I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. I'm not exactly sure if I want to continue on with the series and read the second book, but it was okay. I don't regret reading it, but I regret spending money on it. This book was unnecessarily long and had so many info dumps that I was honestly losing my mind. So this book follows two different timelines, and one timeline is about this queen and her sister who were Phoenix Riders like 50 years ago maybe, and about how they kind of took over the empire. And then we're also following like the present day timeline, which is Veronica and her sister Val, and they want to become Phoenix Riders, so they are taking care of these Phoenix eggs and they want to hatch these Phoenixes and become Phoenix Riders. I actually really loved Veronica and Val's timeline and their storyline. I loved all the characters we met in the present day timeline, and if this book just followed this present timeline, I would have actually really loved this book and I would have given it 5 out of 5 stars. But my problem was the past timeline and all the info dumps from the past timeline that I just did not care for. The writing was really beautiful and the imagery was really vivid. I enjoyed reading it and I had an easy time imagining this world. I had an easy time imagining the setting and the characters. Everything was really well described, so kudos to the author for that. But this book kind of read like a history book. It felt like I was reading a history book about this past timeline, these past queens, these past Phoenix Riders, and I just didn't care. So each chapter was from the present timeline, and between each chapters were these like excerpts from the past and letters from the past. I started skipping them. They were so boring. I did not care. You do not understand how little I cared about this past timeline. It kept me from enjoying the book because it kept taking me out of the story. The world building is really amazing, and I know the author put a lot of time in creating all these timelines and having all this like history of this world, like it's very rich, but I as a reader just don't care. Like, it's great that the author has done all this world building, but I just don't need to know. And I was just sad because I wanted to care and I wanted to enjoy it, but what can you do? And even in the present storyline chapters, the characters would go on like long monologues about stuff that happened in the past, like 50 years ago. Our main character would be like, oh, I remember when my grandmother used to tell me stories of Avalkyra Ashfire, the queen who ruled like 20 years ago, whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And she'd go on for like pages. And I was like, just shut up. Just go, just raise your phoenix and become a Phoenix Rider. I don't care about this queen from the past. This book did not need to be as long as it was. These info dumps did not need to exist, and because of that, I did not enjoy this book as much as I could have. So that was my first read of March. Everything else was better than this. The next book I read was Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved this, and I actually listened to the audiobook. I decided to pick this up because Megan from Meg with Books recommended this audiobook in her audiobook recommendation videos. One of the reasons I loved this book was because the audiobook was amazing. This book follows a detective named Poirot, and he is on like this long train journey all the other passengers, they've kind of been getting to know each other and stuff. And one night, someone happens to get murdered on this train. What happens is that the train actually like breaks down kind of overnight, so now they are stuck in the middle of nowhere. There's no like police or detectives around to help them figure out this murder, so Poirot, because he's a detective, goes around and interviews all the different passengers to try and figure out what really happened. It is definitely not the type of book I would pick up usually, but because it was an audiobook and because it was fairly short, I decided to give it a go, and I am so glad I did, because it was one of the most immersive and amazing audiobooks I've ever listened to in my life. This is the only audiobook I have listened to at normal speed because I enjoyed it that much. Every time I listen to audiobooks, I go like ×2 the speed, but this narrator, he was amazing. He did different accents for each of the different characters. It was just so good. I don't know what else to say about it. I loved all the characters. I loved how the mystery kind of unravels slowly, and by the end you kind of figure it out yourself too, but still it is like such a good book. This book isn't really very heavy on character development because the book takes place in such a short period of time. I think it's only like a couple days where Poirot is going through all the interviews and stuff, so the actual timeline of the book isn't that long, which is why the characters don't really change that much, but like the mystery and the plot and like the storytelling itself is really beautiful, and I would really recommend you pick up this audiobook if you get the chance. If I had picked up the physical copy, I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much as I did listening to the audiobook, so highly recommend the audiobook. Please check it out. The next book I read in March is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which I buddy read with Tate from Bookish Constellations, and they really loved the book. I love the book too, but I'm more of a nitpicky reader than they are, so I'm really sorry, Tate. So last year I read An Enchantment of Ravens, also by the same author, and I absolutely loved it, which is why I was really looking forward to reading this book. I really loved the author's writing style. I found it to be very beautiful and whimsical and magical, and I was just excited to read something else by the same author. I did notice that the plot was basically the same as An Enchantment of Ravens. I mean, the main character is accused of something she didn't do, and then our mysterious, handsome, broody love interest shows up and whisks her away for trial. That's basically what happened in both An Enchantment of Ravens and Sorcery of Thorns as well, so I was like, So our main character is Elizabeth, and she has been taught from the day she was born that all sorcerers are evil. And she works in a library, and in this library the books are kind of like magical, and they kind of have like souls. Like, you know the Harry Potter books from the restricted section of the library that like scream and stuff? All these books are kind of like those books. So one night, a grimoire breaks out from the library and she has to fight it, and she figures out that something messy is going on, and she must work with Nathaniel Thorn, who is a sorcerer, to kind of fix all this mess. I have to mention though that the synopsis on the cover of the book kind of ruined things for me, and there was like a spoiler in there kind of that I would have preferred not knowing going into the book because it would have helped me enjoy it better. And the synopsis also said that Elizabeth had to work with her nemesis or something, Nathaniel Thorn, to figure things out. But like, Nathaniel Thorn isn't even like her nemesis. He is not in any way her mortal enemy, and it made this book seem to be like a enemies to lovers kind of situation when it really wasn't. Nathaniel was nothing but kind to Elizabeth from the very beginning. It was just her own like prejudices kind of painting him as evil and sorcerer and mortal enemy number one. The first couple chapters were boring, not gonna lie, but the moment we were introduced to Nathaniel, I was like hello. I really loved Nathaniel from the get-go. I also loved Silas. Silas was probably my favorite character in this book. I think he is like the character with the most depth in this book, and I just love him. I unfortunately was not a big fan of Elizabeth. I just didn't like her. She just kind of seemed like a really boring main character. Like, there was nothing about her that was like unique other than the fact that she grew up in a library. Tate, I'm so sorry. Like, I know you love her. I'm so sorry, Tate. Like, I feel bad. I feel really, really bad. I don't really understand the magic system in this book because basically how it works is that sorcerers make a bargain with a demon. So they basically bargain away some years of their life in exchange for magical powers. I just found there to be some inconsistencies between what Nathaniel could do and what he couldn't versus what some other sorcerers could do and what they couldn't. And I don't really want to go too much in detail because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but you can ask me about them personally if you want to know. Now, like I said, I really loved Nathaniel because I am trash, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that he really didn't exist out of Elizabeth's own storyline, if that makes sense. It seemed like he was just there to kind of further the plot, and every time Elizabeth needed him, he showed up, but it didn't really seem like he had anything else going on in his life. So it really makes me wonder, like, what was he doing before Elizabeth showed up? He's just chilling in his study for the entirety of the book until Elizabeth is like, hey Nathaniel, can you help me out with this? So I'm like, character development really took a hit there. Even Elizabeth herself, it didn't really seem like she was doing anything. It just kind of seemed like she happened to be at the right place at the right time. It seemed like stuff was just happening to her and she was just there chilling. Also, the romance situation kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, I was obviously expecting it because, like, obviously there's going to be romance between the two, but it just went from like here to here and I was like, anyways, now that I am done roasting this book, I just want to say that I really enjoyed it. The writing style was really beautiful. I genuinely really enjoyed reading this book and I loved Nathaniel and I loved Silas. I love the whole vibe of it. Sorry, Tate, for roasting it, but I just want to say that I did enjoy this book overall. And last, but definitely not the least, The Bitter Kingdom by Ray Carson. Dare I say that it is my favorite read of the month. Even above all the Percy Jackson that I read, it was so good. 5 out of 5 stars. For those of you who don't know, Nicole from Nicole and Her Books created this read-along for the series. This is the 3rd book in the series, and at the end of each month there is a live show with all the other co-hosts, which include Megan, Simone, and myself. I did not know when we started reading the first book how much I was gonna enjoy this series. This series follows our main character, Elisa, who at the age of 16 is married off to the king of another kingdom. So she goes to another palace and has to deal with all the politics and how to live in a court of another king and all that. And she is also the bearer of something called the Godstone, which means that she has been chosen by God to do great things in her lifetime. So she's off in this other country. She must figure out how to live as queen of another country while also being like the chosen one. And I thought that book 2 in this series is gonna be the best by far. But no, this one really came out of me from nowhere. I was not expecting this book to be this good. This book has no business making me feel this way. I listened to the audiobook for this book as well, and I could not stop listening. The more I continued on with it, the more and more I fell in love with all these characters and all the plot, the politics, the strategies, the missions. It's all so well thought out, and I was fully immersed in this book, in this journey. This book specifically follows Elisa on her mission to kind of rescue someone from another country. And I love Lord Hector. Lord Hector and Elisa own my heart. They own my entire being. Storm and Lord Hector are really up there competing for my favorite spot, and I am not okay. Everything is so satisfying. This is kind of like the end of the series, so it wraps up really well, and I'm really satisfied with how this book ended. All the side characters really come out of their shell, and I'm so happy for all these characters, and they're gonna live happily ever after. Love it. Just love it. So those are the 4 books I read recently, and I'm actually really happy with how my month of reading is going so far. Please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them if you have read them, and hopefully you could hear me in this video. I know there were crows and frogs and bugs, so hopefully you were able to hear me over all the noise. Anyways, my name's Ishi. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I hope your day is as wonderful as you are.